I want to spend a little time with you on this because there is now a full-scale effort by Biden, by his surrogates and the media, the Democrat Party, to make the suggestion that Joe Biden has the power to violate separation of powers, to seize from Congress its core function, that is, the House of Representatives, to borrow, spend, and tax. Then they wrap themselves in the Constitution while they're violating the Constitution. I've told you many times that's how they work. They wrap themselves in liberty while they're promoting tyranny as well. And so I'm going to break it down again. I did, as you know, on Life, Liberty, and Levin during my opening statement. People say, why do you call an opening statement and not a monologue? Actually, most people don't, just a few eggheads. I said, because I don't like the word monologue. It is a statement that I am making, an assertion, an argument. And people can accept it or not. But I went through it in fairly significant detail. Obviously, people come and go on radio. They come and go on TV. Maybe they're not watching. Who knows? Doesn't matter. I just want to make sure I get the case out because we're getting down to the nitty-gritty now. First, let's begin with the offender, Joe Biden. And I want you to think about something. If Donald Trump or Ronald Reagan or either Bush said, I have the unilateral power to issue bonds, I have the unilateral power to lift the debt ceiling. In other words, I had the power, and my party had the power, to pass a budget that was wildly out of control, and now I have the power on my own to force the American people to pay for it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is as dictatorial and totalitarian as it gets. And I don't care about Lawrence Tribe and the other old buffoons who are out there twisting the Constitution to accommodate their needs. We don't put up with that crap here. Period. But here's Biden in Hiroshima, Japan. And he's questioned yesterday by the Deuce, Peter Ducey. Cut 2, go.
And Mr. President, on the debt limit, you said already, I've done my part. Do you think that if there is a breach, nobody is going to blame you?
Of course no one will blame me. I know you won't. You'll be saying Biden did a wonderful job. I know you.
Would you be blameless in a default situation?
On the merits, based on what I've offered, I would be blameless. On the politics of it, no one will be blameless. And by the way, that's one of the things that some are contemplating. I actually had. Well, I got to be careful here. I think there are.
You can tell that he's losing with it. It's painful, isn't it, Mr. Medusa? Anyway, he says, I think there are some MAGA Republicans. Go ahead.
MAGA Republicans in the House who know the damage that it would do to the economy.
This is really frustrating and outrageous. He acts like MAGA Republicans, that is, Republicans who have and do support Donald Trump in the House. And by the way, 75 million of you. That somehow you're the kamikazes. Speaking of Hiroshima, that you're the kamikazes, that you're the ones who want to take down the economy. He's spending like a drunken Marxist. He's demanding that Republicans raise the debt ceiling for his spending and McConnell's spending. They're saying, no, we've got to start to trim this budget, trim the sales, and they're not even talking about a massive amount of money. And so now there's MAGA Republicans who want to take down the economy. This guy is, as I've told you before, a lousy, nasty street politician. And as I've said over and over, he's just a serial liar. That's all he is. Go ahead.
Because I am president and presidents are responsible for everything, Biden would take the blame, and that's the one way to make sure Biden's not reelected.
Aren't you Biden? What do you think? Biden is not. No. You're not even in the United States when you're making these comments. You're in Hiroshima, Japan. And as McCarthy has said repeatedly, for 97 days, by my calculation, that's over 3 months, he couldn't get a phone call or a meeting with Biden. Now, here's why. Because Biden and the Democrats figured they could play chicken and the Republicans would buckle. They figured the House Republicans wouldn't stay united. They were wrong. And they figured they'd be chopped to pieces by the Senate Republicans. There are some, but Mike Lee took the leadership in the Senate and got 43 of them to sign a letter in support of what the House Republicans did. Now, keep something in mind when you're debating with your family and friends and neighbors. The Republicans already raised the debt ceiling, but they want some cuts. But they already voted to raise it in the House. Schumer won't bring it up for a vote because they want all spending covered, no matter what. No matter what. And spending is so completely out of control. Now, what about this 14th Amendment that we've discussed at length? We started discussing this months ago. I remember discussing it years ago. The 14th Amendment. What about the 14th Amendment? Does that empower the president to unilaterally borrow money? Does that even sound right to any of you? Has anybody ever done that before? No. So why now, if it's in the 14th Amendment? Why even negotiate with the Republicans in Congress if it's in the 14th Amendment? Why even waste your time with Congress at all if it's in the 14th Amendment? Just do it. You don't have to wait till the brink. If you think you have that power, you could have done it 5 months ago. Frightening, isn't it? We fought a revolution to have representative government, this fantastic Constitution, to get away from a monarchy, and now we have this guy. Here he is, cut 3, go.
I'm looking at the 14th Amendment as to whether or not we have the authority. I think we have the authority. The question is, could it be done and invoked in time that it would not be appealed and as a consequence past the date in question and still the fall of the debt? That's a question that I think is unresolved.
Well, listen to what he said at the beginning, though. We have the authority, he said. I quote unquote, I think we have the authority. He believes he has the authority with his own magic wand to issue bonds, other treasury instruments on his own, even though Article 1 specifically provides that Congress has these powers. The 14th Amendment does not counter that, doesn't alter it at all. It was passed in 1868, has nothing to do with this, had everything to do with paying the debt after the Civil War, what debt would be honored, what debt would not be. Has absolutely nothing to do with what's going on today, which is why Lawrence Tribe says it does, because that's what he does. He spews stupid. Even Obama understood this in 2011. Cut 4, go.
Now, the gentleman asked about the 14th Amendment. There's a provision in our Constitution that speaks to making sure that the United States meets its obligations. And there have been some suggestions that a president could use that language to basically ignore this debt ceiling rule, which is a statutory rule. It's not a constitutional rule. I have talked to my lawyers. They are not persuaded that that is a winning argument. So the challenge for me is to make sure that
enough. It's a very convoluted way of saying, no, I don't. I don't have that power. Now, I've told you why. Michael McConnell also, though, is a Stanford law professor. He was a federal appellate judge. He was a top lawyer for quite some time at OMB in the Reagan administration. You know, the old Reagan administration that never did anything. We should forget about Reagan and think about someone else, I guess. He recently wrote in the New York Times, President Biden is playing a dangerous game. The federal government's deficit spending is about to exceed the amount Congress has authorized it to borrow. And the treasuries run out of what are known as extraordinary measures to stave off disaster. Congress and the president must negotiate a compromise resolution or the nation faces the prospects of a default. The House of Representatives has already passed a bill that would raise the nation's debt limit by $1.5 trillion. By $1.5 trillion. That's not funny money. That's a lot of money. Coupled, however, with proposed spending cuts. And its Republican leaders have signaled a willingness to negotiate. Mr. Biden instead has demanded that Congress raise the debt ceiling without conditions. The House Republicans' insistence on negotiations and compromise is not hostage-taking, quote-unquote. It is the ordinary stuff of politics. Two sides can posture all they want, but in the end, Congress and the president have to reach an agreement. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. The Constitution does not permit a unilateral solution on either side. Begin with the constitutional basics. Article 1, Section 8. List the powers of Congress. The first clause of Section 8 provides Congress may lay and collect taxes. The second clause provides that Congress has the power to borrow money on the credit of the United States. These clauses are absolute. The executive branch cannot impose taxes or borrow funds on its own authority. Together with the power over spending, these powers are known as the power of the purse, which belongs entirely to the legislative branch. These provisions have pride of place among Congress's powers for a reason. Before the so-called Glorious Revolution of 1688 and the English Civil War, the Stuart monarchs asserted the power to tax and borrow without parliamentary approval, which effectively meant the power to rule without Parliament, which I just mentioned, without Congress. The result was not just autocratic rule at home, but also periodic defaults on the royal debt, astronomical interest rates for government borrowing, and ultimately civil war. Well, our framers didn't wish to recreate the Stuart monarchy, and the first two clauses of Section 8 reflect that aversion. The power of the purse may be the most fundamental element in our system of checks and balances, and I'll add, and Joe Biden wants to seize them from the House of Representatives. I just am appalled and disgusted by the way this is reported. The debt limit is nothing more than an authorization from Congress to borrow a certain amount up to the certain limit, a certain limit. The debt ceiling is not a restriction on what would otherwise be the president's ability to borrow. It's an authorization for the executive branch to borrow up to that ceiling. Above that, the president may not go. Nonetheless, Biden's advisors reportedly are contemplating violating the congressional debt limit based on a far-fetched interpretation of Section 4 of the 14th Amendment, propounded by some academics. Previous administrations have flirted with this idea, but all rejected it. Mr. Biden should do the same. It would twist the words of the 14th Amendment, ignore its history, and send the markets into turmoil. Now, I want to dig into this more deeply as he discusses it, as I've discussed it many times in the past. But I want to make it clear that Biden just asserted yesterday in Japan that he has this authority. So I hope you understand that Biden just asserted that he has dictatorial powers that no president since the 14th Amendment has ever asserted. Ever. This isn't complicated, ladies and gentlemen. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were passed after the Civil War by the Republicans, the Republican states. They dealt with the aftermath of the Civil War. 14th Amendment has absolutely nothing to do with the financing of the country and who has what power. What is it now? Let's see. Almost 120 years later, ended in 1865. Well, more than that. My math here is not great. 160 years almost. But that said, it would never states would never have ratified an amendment that would give the power to raise money to pay off debt to the President of the United States. Ever. And they didn't. And neither does the language of the 14th Amendment. We're going to get into this now, as we must, unfortunately. I feel like we're in this endless position of having to defend the Constitution line by line, almost word by word, every damn week. But that's what we'll do if we have to. I challenge Lawrence Tribe. I challenge any advocate of the view that the 14th Amendment provides Biden with the power to unilaterally raise the debt. I challenge them to point to a single member of Congress in 1868 who said such a thing. I challenge them to point to a single state representative or state senator during the ratification process of the 14th Amendment who said such a thing. Just one. I challenge them to find one speech from any of these members that said what they today say is meant by the language in the 14th Amendment. There is nothing, not one of any of the above, nothing. And I enjoy good debate, I really do, ladies and gentlemen, as will become clear in the days ahead. That said, there's nothing. Let's go on with former judge, law professor Michael McConnell, not to be confused with Mitch McConnell. Section 4 of the 14th Amendment, enacted in the wake of the Civil War, says the validity of the public debt of the United States, authorized by law, shall not be questioned. The immediate purpose was to prevent future Congresses, if controlled by pro-Confederate Democrats, from repudiating pension obligations and other debts incurred to win the Civil War. No doubt it applies beyond those narrow circumstances, but by its terms it does not authorize the President to borrow more money in violation of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 2, which is the article, section, and clause that explicitly, folks, me speaking now, empowers Congress to do these things. Congress. But by its terms, it does not authorize the President to borrow more money in violation of that section of the Constitution, nor does it authorize the President to impose taxes in violation of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, which gives, again, the power to Congress. By its terms, it does not augment the President's powers one iota. Nor does Section 4 have anything to do with payment of the national debt. It does not make it unconstitutional for the United States to run out of money. Nice idea, but impossible. Section 4 prevents the only institution of the government that could deny the quote-unquote validity of the debt, namely Congress, from doing so. For the United States to fail to pay interest or principal on its debt, he writes, would be financially catastrophic, but it would not affect the, quote, validity, unquote, of the debt. When borrowers fail to make payments on lawful incurred debt, this does not, quote, question, unquote, the validity of those debts. Their debts are just as valid as before. It's just that the borrowers are in default. More on that in a minute. Moreover, even if the President were to issue new bonds without congressional authorization, again, which he has no authority to do, the text of Section 4 makes plain that these bonds would not be constitutionally binding. Only public debt, quote, authorized by law, unquote, meaning by statute, has that status. Were President Biden to issue bonds on his unilateral authority, the bond market would know that those bonds were not backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, Biden has no more authority to issue bonds than I do. He has none. Sensible investors would not purchase such bonds or would demand such a high risk premium as to make them uneconomical anyway. Some people assume that the President's power to issue new debt would be resolved legally by the Supreme Court, but in fact, It would be resolved for practical purposes by the bond markets before the courts could even act, and the resolution would not be a happy one. And this is what Biden's worried about when he mumbles on. I don't think I can invoke it in time. President Biden has only one real choice if he wishes to avoid the default, says Michael McConnell. He has to negotiate with Congress, the branch of the government with the authority over borrowing and spending. If that means agreeing to spending reductions, that's hardly a disaster. That's hardly a disaster, especially with a fat, bloated Marxist budget like this. Excuse me, those are my words. That it was previous presidents have done. Indeed, as vice president, Mr. Biden negotiated just such a deal with Obama and Congress. The idea that the 14th Amendment gives the president unilateral power to borrow is dangerous nonsense. Dangerous nonsense. And yet Biden says he does have that power. What do you make of that, America? But this is where the Democrats are. Stephen Cohen, who is a reprobate, low IQ buffoon out of Tennessee. Remember that jerk during testimony and what was he, eating a sandwich or something in front of the microphone, Mr. Producer, to prove some point? Chicken. Why was he doing that again? Nobody remembers other than the fact that he's an a-hole. Cut 5, go.
So I think it's an ace in the hole for the president. I think he'd like to negotiate, and he'd like to be able to show he can work together with the Republicans.
But there you go. You see, ladies and gentlemen, it's the MAGA Republicans. They want to burn the place down. The MAGA Republicans, not the Marxist Democrats. You know, Republicans, don't you think it's time you get into this battle? You get some dirt under your fingernails, dirty hands maybe. Don't you think it's time you call them the Marxists that they are, while they make up names for you? The Boomer generation, or they make up other names for you like the MAGA Republicans. And don't you think it's time you got real and call them the Marxists that they are? Jeanette Yellen, a.k.a. Janet Yellen, on Meet the Depressed. Let's hear what she has to say. This could be interesting. Of course, they have Chuck Todd there, so nothing's interesting. It's dull, it's boring, and it's moronic. Cut 6, go.
Is the 14th Amendment fall into the category of extraordinary measures?
Is that a sentence, Mr. Producer? Is the 14th Amendment fall into the category of extraordinary measures? Shouldn't at least a basic requirement for somebody who has a position like the schmuckster be literacy? And I'm not even saying the King's English, just basic literacy. Is the 14th Amendment... Can you repeat that, Mr. Producer?
Is the 14th Amendment fall into the category of extraordinary measures?
Is the 14th... So I heard correctly. Wow. Okay. Well, what is her answer? Let's go.
Well, extraordinary measures is used in a different way, but there has been much discussion of the 14th Amendment. And as President Biden said, I believe this morning, it doesn't seem like something that could be appropriately used in these circumstances, given the legal uncertainty around it and given the tight time frame we're on. So
let's stop there. By the way, he can't wait to speak, this illiterate Chuck. Wait, I got to get in there. I'm so smart. First of all, she got it half right and half wrong. He said there's a tight time frame. In essence, that's what Biden said. He also said that he has the power to do it. That's an extraordinary statement from a president of the United States. That he has the power to unilaterally seize the most important function, certainly one of the most important, a core function of Congress, and specifically the House of Representatives unilaterally. And so, therefore, according to Joe Biden, he has the power to propose budgets and to fund budgets. And he doesn't have to negotiate with anybody. So why did he wait to the last minute, as I keep saying? Why did he wait to the last minute? Why didn't he say, this is my budget, and either you pass it or I'm going to fund it in 3 months? Why didn't he do that? Then it would have been timely. I shouldn't give them ideas, of course, but the answer is it is so recklessly, so obviously unconstitutional. And yet the Democrats are prepared to do it. Biden, his phony professors and so forth, they want it. They're prepared to do it because they want to burn the place down. And they want to replace it with some kind of Marxist paradise. Can you imagine the hell they're going to unleash? They have no respect for these institutions. Not the Supreme Court, not the United States Senate. If they can't attack it directly, they attack it surreptitiously. Look what they've done with the FBI and the intelligence agencies. Look what they've done at the border. This is a wrecking crew. That's what it is. Go ahead.
Our hope is that Congress will raise the debt ceiling.
They did raise the debt ceiling. But they didn't raise it as much as the Democrats want. Now, what's this guy, Kahana's name? What is his name from California? Ro Khanna or something? I saw him on TV lying. That's right, Ro. You can call in if you like. I've had it. My teeth are sharp. I'm ready to take on anybody at this point. Ro, whatever. Come on the show. You said something on TV that was an extraordinary deception to the American people. You said this budget already passed. True. This money has already been spent. That's false. All the money's not spent until the end of the fiscal year. The end of the fiscal year is September 30th, not May 30th. And that budget was passed as fast as possible by the Democrats in Congress. You voted for that, Ro, as well as the Democrats in the Senate and the McConnell team. The McConnellites. They're not really Republicans. I don't know what they are. All I know is I don't like them. But anyway, they rushed that through, and now they're saying, you guys got to pay for this. And by the way, they voted on it late. They're supposed to pass a budget by October 1st. That's when the weird fiscal year of the federal government begins. But they waited till after the election. How does that work? They pass all these little continuing resolutions. But Roe voted for this stuff. He says, well, the next budget. Well, no, they want to look at this budget. They want to look at this budget. Chuck Todd is on with Byron Donalds. Byron's on CNN. He's on Meet the Press. Didn't we invite him on the other week and he canceled? He couldn't make it. He was on CNN. I remember when we brought Byron on this show and on TV. I think I was the first one to do it. Well, easy come, easy go. Let's continue. Listen to this, because Byron's a sharp dude. Cut 7, go.
Former President Trump said about the debt ceiling in 2019. Take a listen.
I can't imagine anybody ever even thinking of using the debt ceiling as a negotiating wedge.
Why don't you agree with him on this?
Well, first of all,
stop. Using the debt ceiling as a negotiating tool. The Republicans are trying, under McCarthy and the conservatives, MAGA, to save the country. If Joe Biden gets his way, in 10 years, the on-budget national debt will be almost $51 trillion. It's 32.5 or 7, depending on how you count it, trillion today. Is that good for America? And we won't be able to undo that. Here we finally have fiscally relatively responsible members in the House doing everything they can with a tiny little majority. Up against Washington, up against Biden, up against the Senate Democrats, and quite frankly, the McConnellites, up against the media, with a tiny, tiny majority. They're the David against Goliath. And they're doing exactly what they ought to do. And then we get Chuck Todd. Now, Chuck Todd's wife is a Democrat operative. Chuck Todd's wife gets paid to advise Democrat candidates on how to beat Republicans. So Chuck tapes Donald Trump in 2019. Now, what did Donald Trump say? Let's start from the top again, and I will explain. Go.
Former President Trump said about the debt ceiling in 2019. Take a listen.
I can't imagine anybody ever even thinking of using the debt ceiling as a negotiating wedge.
So what he's saying there is a negotiating wedge. Not for something that's has nothing to do with the budget or something. What he's saying there is, don't use it to negotiate for this, for that, or the other. What the Republicans are saying is, look, we got to cut spending. We're not looking for a negotiation wedge. It's the only measure we have to cut spending. Now, Trump wasn't spending more than the Democrats, probably more than we should, but he wasn't the one pushing the budget. It was the Democrats again. As bad as the Republicans are, and they're bad, the Democrats are 10 times worse.